full today, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off here. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us for this Digital Divide and Smart Cities workshop. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Antoinette Meyer and I'm the Director of Mobility and Innovation for SANDAG. It's really great to see so much interest in this topic, and I hope everyone will actively participate in what I think will be a very interesting discussion about digital equity and all of the opportunities that greater levels of connectivity can bring to everyone in the region. Before I hand it over to Hassan and Secretary Mapeek to get us started, I just want to touch on a few housekeeping items. Next slide, please. We ask that you please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking. You can use the chat for comments outside of the discussion, and we'll have staff that are following the chat. But during the discussion and the Q&A session, we really want to hear directly from all of you. So please go ahead and just raise your hand and we'll call on you to comment or ask questions. We have an exceptional panel today of public sector leaders in digital equity and smart cities. So I really encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity, ask questions, engage with each other and the panel. We want to hear your feedback today. As you know, we're developing a digital equity strategy and action plan, and we want that plan to support all of you with tools and resources that you need to advance digital equity at the local level. So please share your thoughts during the discussion today. So without further ado, it is with great pleasure that I introduce our fearless leader here at SANDAG, Hassan Akrada, to kick things off. Hassan. Hassan, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Antoinette, and good morning to all of you. It's good to see all of you. I want to thank all of you for being here, first of all. Antoinette is very modest, so I want to tell you that I am really honored and lucky to work with such a talented person. She's taking this future mobility to a new height here in San Diego. And I think people are following suit in the rest of the state. So thank you, Antoinette. Thank every one of you, the panelists, the participant. We are surrounded by people who can make big things happen in our cities. We are here to talk about a very important issue. Closing the digital divide is essential to our future. It is not only an infrastructure issue, but it's an equity issue. And during the last year, during COVID-19, has made it clear that we have a growing gap between those who have access to high-speed internet and those who do not. If we can help people in underserved communities connect to broadband, we can also help connect them to opportunities. Let me repeat that. Connecting to broadband means connecting to opportunities. Social justice issues always is economic issues, and accessing opportunities is dealing with social justice issues. We have the opportunity right now aligned with the state federal institution to ensure that our residents have access to high quality broadband. Our 2021 regional transportation plan relies heavily on broadband connection. We're planning the system of the future. System of the future is all about future mobility, about transportation as a service. It's all about what we call the next operating system. And without that, the next 20 years is going to show that we're not doing anything for transportation. Transportation and technology in the next few decades is going to be the answer to a lot of the challenges we have today. We know that cities thrive when they are better connected. Businesses, tourists, attractions, and more will want to be a part of your city. It is an economic development issue. Opportunities that we cannot miss as we recover as a global community from COVID-19. This is the foundational step in transforming our city into smart cities. I can guarantee you that no city in our nation or anywhere want to be a dumb city, right? We all want to be smart cities. Our board of directors, elected officials from each of the cities that many of you work in, adopted the resolution in January committing to ending the digital divide. That's why we have high expectation for each of you here, because you have the opportunity to make this come to fruition. Our state is also looking to us to make this happen. Leaders around the states believe that the San Diego region will be a national leader in this space. We are also working with SCAG region and its county leader to jointly address the digital divide so that Southern California leads. One such leader is, I'm honored to call a friend, an amazing leader, is Sunny Wright McPeak. I could spend the next hour talking about Secretary McPeak. I known Secretary McPeak when she was the Secretary of Transportation. She was in charge of the biggest departments, Caltrans, DMV, Highway Patrols, and others. Secretary McPeak right now is the president and CEO of the California Emerging Technology Fund, a statewide nonprofit organization whose mission is to close the digital divide by accelerating the deployment and adoption of broadband. I will tell you this, always been impressed with Secretary McPeak, but I am so impressed that she took this issue and brought it to new heights. I, for one, and with my colleagues from around the state and Caltrans are learning of how to lead. She's leading. We cannot thank her enough. We're so grateful for her, and I'm honored to call her a friend. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our leader, Secretary McPeak.
Thank you, Executive Director Ekrata. Hassan, what a pleasure it is and true honor to continue to be able to work with you. We've worked together for the better part of 2 decades, and to be sure, I have always valued that time and learned from you. And as I had the opportunity to sit with the Sandag Board of Directors in January for a couple of hours and listen to the quality debate of the issues before them, I congratulated them on being so fortunate as to recruit you from SCAG to Sandag. I don't know quite how it happened, although Jackie Bacharach and I were saying as we were gathering this morning, what a coup it is for San Diego. So I just have to thank you and return the appreciation for your leadership, Hassan. There is absolutely no substitute for what you were doing as a leader of one of the largest metropolitan planning organizations in the country that we are counting on to be the trailblazer. I also want to say I have had such a great time, really fun working with your colleagues, your team. So Antoinette and Jack and Robin and Tessa and Sanjeev, you've got what I would call a Division I all-stars. And I appreciate being included as part of your staff. And that's how I'm actually functioning. I'm now staff to Sandag. And I like that opportunity because when I did work for the state of California, I always enjoyed the opportunity to be in San Diego County, to sit with the 18 cities, to learn from Sandag and each of the jurisdictions about what kind of really groundbreaking things you were doing. And I would take that message of progress back to Sacramento, and then I would joke a little bit in the governor's office about the fact that San Diego is far enough away from Sacramento that you could be this great laboratory for democracy and innovation. And I'm counting on that continued stripe of independence and clear thinking outside of the boxes. I also want to say that as I listened to in January, your board adopt a resolution committing to digital equity, I was so excited to be able to support your leadership. Today's meeting is about bringing in now what the elected officials have put forward as vision and then translating that into action. So to each of you that are joining this webinar today, and that you're one of the valuable and experienced professionals within your own jurisdictions, we're counting on your leadership. It is somehow appropriate and fitting that it got scheduled on Earth Day. So today, on April 22nd, on Earth Day, I want to share with you the lens that I used when I was working for the state, when I was the CEO of the Bay Area Council, when I was a county supervisor in Contra Costa County. And that is to think about the work we do with a triple bottom line, the 3 E's of sustainable development or of smart growth. That is, the 3 E's are the economy, the environment, and equity, and they are part and parcel of each other. They aren't trade-offs. To understand what it means to achieve a triple bottom line is to realize that if we can optimize 2, we also optimize the 3rd, that they cannot be tackled individually. So think about, it's all a part of a package if we are adding to economic productivity and protecting the environment and sharing more of both of those with more people. That's what we mean by equity. When I was secretary, I love the fact that you said nobody wants to be a dumb, a dumb jurisdiction. Well, I will fully confess that I was trying to forge a smart growth policy within the administration. And the best I could do is get us all to agree that we were anti-dumb growth. So let me just say we've evolved quite a bit to this point to recognize that part of also a smart growth strategy is optimizing broadband, high-speed internet infrastructure in order to get to a smart community. I also want to just share that when we talk about broadband, I'll use that term, it is a generic term legally, actually in state statute that we got introduced, that includes all high-speed internet infrastructure, wireline and wireless. We're technology neutral, but we're very clear about the quality of service that each customer should have. That's from the residential last mile, although sometimes it should be called the first mile, to an anchor institution, to all government buildings, to our businesses and employers, to our research institutions. And in San Diego County, we've got amazing, amazing research institutions that need the highest speed possible of internet connectivity just to support the brain trust within both San Diego and California. Today, when you think about internet, here's how I viewed it when I was responsible for supporting your leadership on transportation. As all my colleagues at Caltrans will say, they recall me talking about, we are going to be a mobility company, not a transportation bureaucracy, but a mobility company. Our best product in the transportation world is mobility. And the best trip is a virtual trip. If I could unload a trip on the transportation, surface transportation system, but also transit, I not only was relieving congestion, but also reducing an impact on the environment. We've now also come to understand that in the name of equity, those of us who are not connected to the high speeds that we may need to be able to communicate with each other and just participate today, we are disadvantaged and we're being left behind at an accelerating pace. And that is why Governor Newsom issued an executive order on broadband for all. An action plan was developed and submitted by the California Broadband Council at the end of December. It essentially calls upon everybody to come forward and contribute to the solution. I want to underscore that it is essential that we have that leadership from the state, but implementation happens in each of your communities on the ground. And so we are, as daring as to at SANDAG and with the Southern California Association of Governments, with the work of the California Emerging Technology Fund, now joined by also Caltrans and District 11. So we've got Gustavo and Chris Schmidt at District 11 joining with SANDAG and the statewide Caltrans organization to say, we are going to assure that we achieve what the governor envisioned to get everybody connected, and we're going to do it on a pace that matches the sense of urgency that we must bring to this task. Therefore, today, as you listen to the presentations, think about what you are able to do as a leader to contribute to the solutions. This week, we were pleased to be able to release an updated set of guidelines, a resource guidebook for local governments to help in the development of policies around digital inclusion and implementation tips. That resource guide is available online through SANDAG. It originally was done 10 years ago with the Orange County Business Council. This time we updated it in partnership with Valley Vision in Northern California, but it draws upon all the expertise of cities and counties throughout California. And we've done this in collaboration with the League of Cities and with CSAC over the years. What you will find in that guidebook is a delineation of the roles that each of us in local government have. First, we are policymakers, and then that rolls up into the San Diego Association of Governments. Secondly, we are planners. We plan for land use, we plan for transportation, we plan for public works, we plan for information technology and the delivery of services. We, third, are regulators. We say yes or no on land use. We say yes or no on projects. So we're regulators. We're also customers. Think about all of the money that each of the cities in San Diego, all 18 cities in the county, the 19 jurisdictions together are paying to internet service providers, that if you aggregated that demand, you have a lot of negotiation power. And lastly, we're service providers, and we know that we can be more efficient if we've got high-speed connectivity throughout our region. When I'm looking to SANDAG and each of you for leadership, think about we're also bold enough to combine that with the Southern California Association of Governments, 216 local governments, together representing 60% of the population of California, the biggest state in the nation. And we are saying we are going to be the model for the rest of the nation. And that is a pretty tall order. However, I am absolutely confident that each of you together are capable of achieving that bold vision. So today, while I am saluting the all-star team of SANDAG, what we're building together is the dream team for California. Each of you as leaders are capable of taking responsibility in your role, your expertise, and working with others to get the job done. So I'm going to listen with great interest. I'm prepared to support what comes out of this conversation. There's already been such innovative thinking. An example, on just Monday of this week, maybe it was Tuesday, we met with Caltrans, and I just want to salute that Director Omashakan brought his entire headquarters team, as well as the 4 districts in Southern California, the directors, to the conversation and pledge, we're going to work together in the interest of mobility, in the interest of those 3 E's. And we started a discussion on how we could, for example, deploy broadband along State Route 67, a good example of thinking that came from SANDAG. So I close with thanking you, Hassan, thanking your entire team for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. And I expect to see some very bold decisions and actions out of SANDAG and all of the jurisdictions within San Diego County. I know that's possible because I know how smart and how great all of you are.
Thank you, Sunny. Beautifully said as usual. Could you go to the next slide, James? Okay, so to get things started, I just want to make sure that we have a common definition for the digital divide and a basic understanding of what broadband is and how it works. So for the workshop today, we're defining the digital divide as the gap between members of society who have high quality broadband service and those who do not, which are primarily our rural and tribal communities and low income households. The digital divide is definitely bigger than this definition, and it includes things like having an adequate device, knowing how to use that device, having the skills you need to navigate the internet. But for today, we're primarily focused on broadband access. Next slide. So what is broadband? Well, at the most basic level, broadband is a high-speed internet connection that can be provided by a variety of means, from DSL to cable, fiber, wireless, and satellite. Next slide. But regardless of how broadband is provided, high speed is the most important part of that definition. Not all internet connections are technically broadband. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC, regulatory agency at the federal level, defines a broadband connection as one with a minimum download speed of 20 megabits per second and a minimum upload speed of 3 megabits per second. Now, this has been the federal threshold since 2015, even though these speeds may not be adequate in today's environment when we have many people in the same household online doing really critical activities like school and work or doctor's appointments, along with all of the other connected devices that we have in our homes these days that require a lot of bandwidth. So for this reason, our state has set a speed goal of 100 megabits per second. The map on this slide shows the areas in our region that have fixed broadband service with advertised speeds that meet that federal threshold of 25.3. And because it's only showing fixed broadband, you don't see areas served by just mobile or satellite. This map is based on advertised speeds, so the actual speed of the service experienced by the consumer can be different, and we'll look at speed test data later. But regardless, our rural communities are obviously very underserved, as you can see. Next slide. The digital divide affects more than rural communities, though. Low-income households and seniors are far less likely to subscribe to internet at home, and this is probably due to the cost. For many families, the cost of internet service is out of reach, and we'll look at cost data a little later in the presentation as well. We also discovered during the pandemic that we have really high percentages of students in our school districts that don't have internet access, which really makes it difficult for them to participate in distance learning during the pandemic, but also to be able to do online assignments at home beyond the pandemic. Internet access is now critical for education. Next slide. And it goes without saying that access to information and resources online is essential for modern life. And it's something that many of us take for granted, but unconnected and underconnected residents don't have the same educational and economic and social opportunities as the connected residents do. Next slide. And less obvious, and a reason we're here today, is that broadband is critical to smarter city operations and transportation operations. Being a smart city requires connectivity to benefit from technology and data that make municipal operations more sustainable and efficient, and it allows cities to be able to start to provide digital services to residents. And as Hassan pointed out, it's absolutely vital for the future of transportation. It's a critical component of our 2021 regional plan, which relies heavily on technology and connectivity. Broadband can also help us to achieve our goals for reducing VMT and greenhouse gas emissions. We saw during the pandemic how working from home and accessing services remotely does have the potential to reduce traffic congestion, but that requires everyone to have connectivity. Next slide. So it's for all of these reasons that SANDAG is leading the development of a regional digital equity strategy and action plan in partnership with our recently formed Digital Divide Taskforce that some of you participate in. And the strategy will take a very holistic approach to closing the digital divide with actions that increase both access to broadband service as well as adoption of broadband. But as I mentioned, today's workshop is really focused on the access side and ensuring that infrastructure exists to provide affordable, high quality broadband service to every household and every business in the region. So it's our hope that by the end of this workshop today, next slide please, you'll be convinced that municipalities play a very important role in achieving digital equity, and we'll be focusing on that role throughout the workshop today. To date, municipal involvement in broadband has been somewhat limited. Private companies have decided where and what they will build and the price and the quality of service that will be offered. But because broadband is an essential public service, it is imperative that we treat it like other public services with plans and policies to guide it. And it will take both the public and private sectors working closely together to close the gaps that exist today and deliver that connectivity to our residents and our businesses. So with that, I'm happy to introduce Anjali Kalanag. She's from the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is making broadband a priority initiative because it is critical to economic recovery post-pandemic, but also to the overall economic competitiveness of the region moving forward. So Anjali, please tell us what the Chamber is doing to support digital equity.
Thank you so much, Antoinette. And thank you, Mr. Ekrada and the rest of the SANDAG team for the opportunity to participate in this workshop today. So I am Anjali Kalanag. I'm a policy advisor for the San Diego Regional Chamber, and we represent approximately 2,500 businesses and an estimated 300,000 jobs. We're dedicated to making the San Diego region the best place to work and live. And as we all know, the pandemic has dominated the minds of our business and civic leaders for over a year now. We're on track to recovering quicker than other counties, and it's due to the critical work that many agencies and organizations represented here today have been doing. So thank you for that. We're looking forward to getting businesses fully up and running again, welcoming familiar and new customers, encouraging growth of new ventures, and helping to close the digital divide. Next slide, please. So the San Diego Chamber has collaborated with amazing partners listed on this slide to create a long-term roadmap for recovery. Known as the Back in Business Initiative, our group gathered input from the business industry to create this roadmap and provide policy recommendations and best practices to remain resilient. Next slide. The report highlights that the pandemic has affected nearly every industry, mainly tourism, education, and retail. 90% of San Diego businesses have been hit with unanticipated revenue losses. According to a report, and as shown here on the screen, at peak downturn, San Diego lost 205,000 jobs. Tourism, which largely drives our city's budget, lost 50,000 jobs between February and December 2020. And for context, visitor spending in 2020 ended up being $5 billion, and in 2019, it was $11.6 billion. Also, as shown on this screen, a quarter of San Diego's GRP can work successfully remotely, and approximately 1/3 cannot. Further, the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on lower earners, younger workers, and the lower educated. And in December 2020, 25% of people earning less than $27,000 were unemployed. For those earning over $60,000, it was 3%. And as we've heard from our previous presenters, we must also take into account that San Diego's communities of concern have had unequal burdens due to the spread of COVID-19, which also impacts the economy. As we move into recovery, we must ensure that support is provided to these communities to help them thrive. Next slide, please. While we now understand how to keep employees and customers safe, we all know that we will never be going back to business as usual. Businesses will still need ongoing support to continue to succeed under new conditions. And in our report, we identified 6 key areas that businesses are focusing on as they pursue recovery, with accelerating digital adoption as one of them. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, the region's workforce needs will be the same as they were before the pandemic. High housing costs, lack of sufficient childcare options, insufficient infrastructure funding, and addressing equity concerns are all on our minds. Since the onset of the stay-at-home order, internet usage dramatically shifted from office buildings and schools to residential areas. And a positive of this is that broadband networks were and continue to be essential in facilitating remote work by employees in a more productive and efficient way. Another positive outcome is the expansion of telehealth services. And these all highlight the huge need to address the digital divide and how broadband networks thrive on the success of private investment and a balanced regulatory framework. Next slide, please. So why are we interested in accelerating digital adoption? Well, the abrupt closure of businesses early last year brought financial challenges, and the length of closure has also forced many to rethink their long-term strategies. For many, digital adoption is a priority as they rely on high-speed broadband for their operations. From hiring to marketing to sales, overall just connecting with their customers. During the first wave of the pandemic, most businesses across all industries adopted and utilized various digital solutions in order to ease the transition to a work from home workforce. For example, businesses have been able to minimize travel time away from the office with virtual meetings, like we're all doing today. And in honor of Earth Day, this limits the driving and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And then it allows more time for employees to respond to other work issues. So we're definitely not going to see the end of virtual meetings. Of course, it will be a hybrid approach, and that's something that is on the minds of nearly every business today. In regards to a different industry, another example is how many restaurants have implemented a QR scanner to access menu options and facilitate contactless bill pay. So overall, consumer and employee behaviors are evolving, and it's essential that we continue these digital adoptions and access in the region so that all industries can be best positioned to capitalize, see optimized workforce efficiencies, and ensure the health and safety of their employees post-COVID. And then in terms of job growth, as San Diego wants to attract more high-tech jobs, these jobs will need high-speed internet access. But we want to take into account that this does not work for all industries, and some businesses simply cannot leverage technology and return to even modified operations. And we've witnessed this for many in the tourism and hospitality sectors. And then, as Antoinette previously just mentioned, the pandemic has further highlighted the lack of networks in communities of concern, where some households and small businesses face distinct disadvantages when it comes to accessing high-speed broadband. When it comes to businesses, it's more difficult for small businesses as well in the rural areas to expand and grow into new markets, thus having a negative effect on the communities they serve. According to a study by the US Chamber of Commerce and Amazon, unlocking the digital potential for rural small businesses could add over $1 billion to the state's GDP per year. As the study estimated the economic impact of digital technologies on rural small businesses, increased adoption of online tools and digital services could add more jobs, up to 8,000, reach more customers in and outside of their communities, and you could see potential sale growth. It would increase, according to this study, by over 49%. And as Antoinette mentioned previously, with 20 to 40% of students in many districts lacking internet access, ensuring service for these households is crucial for students' future job success. So to summarize, there is a high need for broadband access and adoption throughout the entire San Diego region because our residents and businesses need it to succeed. Next slide, please. So how can we work with internet service providers and agencies to address the digital divide? Well, you have an amazing group of panelists coming up after me to talk about this. So I will not be going further into detail, but to briefly highlight more public-private partnership opportunities. As you've heard here today, adopting smart city technologies to allow for communication between businesses, consumers, and government is crucial. Considering permit streamlining ideas and viewing expansion of internet capacity and maintenance efforts done by broadband providers as routine, and clear communication on timelines, processes, guidelines, and more from both providers and municipalities. Next slide, please. So to close, with SANDAG being the regional planning authority, its priorities, the discussions and following actions you will all be participating in today is influential. Addressing the digital divide is beneficial for all of us, and it will make our region more resilient in the future. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this conversation today, and on behalf of the Chamber, thanks to everyone here for your efforts in helping businesses stay open during these uncertain times. Thanks.
Thanks, Anjali. We're really happy to have the Chamber as a partner in our digital equity work and supporting us. So Before we go on, I think we have just a couple of minutes and to check in to see if anybody has any questions about anything that's presented so far. So if you do, if you can use that raise hand feature, we would appreciate it. And I think someone on the team there is monitoring the raise hand and can call on anyone who has a question. No questions? All right. Let's keep moving forward. Next slide, please. So the first stage of developing our regional digital equity strategy has been focused on collecting data to understand where the infrastructure gaps exist, the quality of service, the cost of service, and of course, barriers to adoption. And this is truly the most important part of the project because we have to understand the nature of the problem so that we can identify the right solutions. This has been incredibly difficult though, more so than we ever could have imagined. The data that's available through regulatory agencies and providers really isn't sufficient and at a level that allows us to do community level planning work. There's also inconsistencies in how data is reported. So it's been a really long and arduous process and we're still working to collect and reconcile data, but better data should be available to agencies, and definitely part of our regional strategy will be to continue to advocate for this so that we can do digital equity planning work. We'll share some key findings of the data that we have so far, though, and we'll start with the broadband infrastructure gap analysis. So regardless of the type of internet subscription that you have, fiber is the backbone. And this slide illustrates the broadband landscape. And what you'll see is that it's kind of similar to transit. We have a first, middle, and last mile. So the first mile is a really large, it's not a mile, it's a very large fiber optic network that can transmit a lot of data over really long distances. And then the middle mile links the backbone to the internet service provider's core network. And then the last mile brings the internet connection to a home or a business. And that last mile can be provided in many different ways as depicted on the slide, but fiber is the essential part of the middle mile network. Next slide. So what does the fiber network look like in our region? Well, this has been very difficult to figure out. The data is not readily available. Providers don't share where they've invested in fiber in the region because it's considered to be confidential. But with some data from the California Public Utilities Commission and Caltrans, we've been able to identify census blocks where fiber is present. Now, to be clear, that does not mean that fiber is widely available within that census block. It doesn't imply anything about the quality of service. The fiber could simply pass through the community, but it helps us to start to identify where there are gaps in that middle mile network. And it's no surprise to see that the biggest gaps are in the rural areas, but there are quite a few holes in the urban areas as well. And just to help demonstrate that the presence of fiber does not necessarily equate to any particular level of service, you can see here that all along the I-8 corridor going east into Imperial County, there is fiber. But next slide. If you look at this map again, where we have fixed broadband service, it's clear that the I-8 corridor communities are definitely underserved. Next slide. So data on actual broadband speeds is also not available, but in order to get a sense of the speeds that people are experiencing, we've been acquiring speed test data. And this slide is portraying 10 months of speed test data in 2020 that's provided by MLab. And MLab is an open source project that's led by the Code for Science and Society and Google. As a disclaimer, speed tests are generally conducted when someone is experiencing service issues, so that likely skews the data towards lower speeds, and there are other factors that can influence speed, like the device that people are using when they're taking the speed test. But as we attempt to cobble together data to understand the state of broadband service in the region, it is another helpful data source for identifying areas where speeds might be insufficient. And of course, not surprisingly, there are significant variations across the region. The areas in orange and red here are reporting low speeds below 25 megabits per second down, and of course are mostly in our rural areas, but there are definitely pockets in the urban areas as well. Next slide. In terms of cost of service, we've compiled information on all of the different plans that are available from the 20 service providers in the region. And the table at the bottom provides a snapshot of these offerings, and the rates vary quite a bit. And you'll see that higher cost doesn't necessarily mean higher speed. In fact, there's some very, very slow service plans that are very expensive, and these are mostly in our rural areas. While there's some great low-cost plans available, they're not available to everyone in the region. Providers have different service areas, so there's no one provider that covers the entire region. And we're working on mapping this data now, but what we've noticed is that the costs are inconsistent. There's several locations in the region where you would pay $45 a month for a 25 megabit per second service. And then there are other areas where you can pay the same amount for 100 megabits per second. We've also identified areas where there are no plans available for under $75 for 6 megabytes per second download speed, which would be very difficult to justify paying for. Next slide. 3 of the large providers offer low-cost plans that are available to households that meet specific eligibility requirements. And those requirements vary somewhat by provider, but typically cover households that are enrolled in a public assistance program like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or the National School Lunch Program. These packages are limited, though, to the qualifying households that fall within the service areas portrayed here on this map. This is the service areas of those 3 providers, which we mapped using CPUC data. Next slide. We use census data to identify areas in the region with a high percentage of low-income households that don't subscribe to broadband at home. And this slide shows the zip codes with the higher percentages in the region. Most are concentrated in the southern portion of the county, including the City Heights, Logan Heights, National City, and San Ysidro, but also the very large zip code that covers Julian and East County. And when we drill down and look at the cost of the service plans available to these households, in these zip codes, it's not really a surprise that adoption is low in cases where there aren't any special low-cost plans that are available. Next slide. Another really important part of the data collection effort was interviewing both providers and public agencies to understand how and if they're working together to plan and deploy broadband infrastructure. So we conducted interviews with about a half dozen providers in the region. We don't have time to go into the details of those interviews today, but this slide highlights some of the key challenges that we heard about consistently, which really focuses on the permitting process. Providers report that permitting can be a really long process. It can be very costly. The information about policies and permitting isn't transparent or easy to find and follow. And common with small cell siting for 5G was restrictive policies or conditions that can make it really difficult to deploy and that may not be consistent with FCC guidelines. We also interviewed almost every jurisdiction in the region. So we definitely want to take some time today to share and discuss what we learned about the state of broadband planning and permitting practices. So I'm going to hand it over to Amy Danino. Amy is our Digital Divide Research Fellow, and she conducted all of these interviews and compiled the information. So I'm going to have her walk you through the findings, and then we'll take a pause for some questions before we move into the panel. So Amy, take it away.
Amy is currently experiencing some technical issues. So if we have some questions on Antoinette's portion of the presentation, this is a perfect time to raise your hand and ask some questions. Any questions on the broadband gap analysis or some of the interview information that Antoinette just shared? Please raise your hand. I see Dinara, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to be that person who asks and then puts my 52 cents. I have 2 questions. The first question is, as you mentioned, you guys will want to do public-private partnerships, and you mentioned the permitting processes. And as you know, the private sector likes to do things fast. And the permitting processes from both Caltrans, MTS, and other public entities can be lengthy because they're trying to protect people from getting hit by cars or trains. And so, but that can discourage the lengthy processes and can discourage the private sector from entering into public partnerships, I guess, speaking from experience. And then the second question is, since we do execution of these fiber optic projects, there are 2 issues, and I wanted to see if planners looked into it. The first is when the fiber optic cables can be cut or damaged during construction. And have you looked into places, have you looked into how, you can mitigate, I know you can do it through redundancy, but how do you mitigate through those maintenance issues? And the second, this part B of that question is basically the end devices for fiber optic cables. Those network equipments, they have a lifetime of 10, 15 years. And so do we have, the processes that look into upgrading, this technology every 10 to 15 years? It's not like civil projects where you pour concrete and, it's good to go. Our processes are dynamic. You have to constantly take inventory. You have to, know what's going on with your networks. You have to keep track of everything, configuration management, and that takes a lot of efforts and a lot of tracking. So those are the questions.
Okay, well, your first one sounded more like a comment, Dinara, as opposed to a question. The second question, I think you answered. Redundancy is the is the answer to that question. And then the third is, it sounds like what you're talking about is something that we need to take into consideration as we build out the strategy. It's the kind of long-term, the lifespan of the equipment, and making sure that we're accounting for that, and the agencies are accounting for that. Is Amy back online?
She is back. We can cut to her now.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, I'm back. I cut out for a second there. All right, well, thank you, Antoinette. I'll get started. So to identify existing conditions, best practices, and opportunities for expanding broadband infrastructure and service, we interviewed planning and public works representatives from 15 cities, the County of San Diego, Caltrans, and the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. These interviews focused primarily on questions relating to access rather than adoption. And our questions focused on 3 core areas: long-term broadband planning, broadband permitting practices, and implementation strategies. And what we found definitely reflects some of what Anjali and Antoinette have described already. So for planning, we found that few cities have conducted a broadband gap analysis or have broadband or digital equity plans. However, 11 cities did report having maps of existing public and or private broadband infrastructure in their jurisdictions, but fewer than half have identified priority development locations. We also identified that there's a need to plan for and facilitate middle mile development in municipalities bordering the reservations to help connect tribal networks. As you saw in the maps that Antoinette shared, most of our region's tribes are underserved and fiber doesn't reach their borders. We need to collaborate with providers, Caltrans, and the county, and the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association to identify areas of need and expand middle mile infrastructure to support tribal network connections. Regarding permitting, we asked agencies to share their broadband permitting practices for both underground and above ground infrastructure. We found that permitting procedures, fees, and timelines vary significantly between cities. While the majority of by right permitting approval times fell within the span of 14 to 120 days, there was more variation for projects that require discretionary review, ranging from 6 months to 10 years for some controversial sites. And regarding wireless, the majority of agencies report that their wireless permitting timelines meet requirements set by the FCC for 60, 90, or 120-day approval times, depending on the nature of the project. And this doesn't include time for applicants to respond to comments or corrections. Permit fees are highly variable, ranging from $100 to $3,000 for administrative permits, and costing as high as $8,500 for discretionary projects. And these fees don't include other common costs associated with development, such as traffic control and inspection costs. A few cities have worked to simplify the application process and reduce barriers to development by creating master license agreements, application checklists, and design guidelines. But many jurisdictions don't have simple, accessible, and easy to navigate information on broadband permitting available to potential applicants. Last, for permitting, we found that microtrenching is allowed by 4 municipalities, but no municipalities have developed a policy around microtrenching, and a regional standard could be helpful since microtrenching significantly reduces the cost and time to lay fiber or cable. Finally, we asked agencies about implementation strategies through public-private partnerships, and if they have any fiber sharing or leasing agreements with internet service providers. Most of the agencies expressed interest in public-private partnerships to increase broadband access, but formal partnerships are uncommon. Several agencies have attempted partnerships where ISPs backed out or where exclusivity requirements went against agency goals to promote competition and access in their jurisdictions. 2 reported having fiber sharing agreements with ISPs. Next slide, please. So, based on these findings, we've identified some best practices from both within and outside the region. I only have time to touch on a few today, but we're compiling best practices, sample templates, and agreements and policies to share with cities in the coming months as part of developing the regional digital equity strategy. And we're happy to hear from you about what resources would be most helpful. So first, here are a few best practices relating to planning. Planning should start with conducting a broadband infrastructure and service gap analysis and developing plans to close the gaps. This includes inventorying and mapping assets, infrastructure, and priority development locations in GIS. The city of Chula Vista is one local city that has created comprehensive plans through their telecommunications master plan and their digital equity and inclusion plan. Outside of our region, New York City has developed a very forward-thinking and innovative internet master plan, which includes an economic impact analysis to demonstrate the benefits of broadband development. They found that establishing equitable infrastructure citywide could result in up to 165,000 new jobs, up to $49 billion increase in personal income, and up to $142 billion incremental gross city products by 2045. Next slide, please. Next are best practices for broadband permitting. There's a need to create user-friendly permitting practices to reduce application barriers. User-friendly and streamlined permitting includes clear and easy to follow checklists, fee schedules, and timelines for broadband permitting. This reduces cost and time to both municipalities and applicants and minimizes misunderstandings between the municipalities and applicants. The City of Lemon Grove's small cell wireless facilities questionnaire is a good example of a succinct and easy to use application checklist. This is accompanied by their small cell wireless facility design standards policy. Updating wireless policies and procedures to meet FCC guidelines and developing clear design standards is recommended, and Lemon Grove's is simple and easy to follow. Another good example for your reference is the City of Los Angeles's U-Permit checklist, which is fully integrated into an online portal where applicants can submit and track applications online. Los Angeles also meets monthly with ISPs to coordinate and adjust policies and processes as needed. This is another recommended best practice. This regular coordination and communication is key to creating effective partnerships that meet both parties' objectives. Next slide, please. Additional best practices for permitting include adopting master agreements and annual encroachment agreements and creating a regionally consistent microtrenching policy. Master agreements and annual encroachment agreements can facilitate routine projects and can be used to establish some by right uses that reduce application and engineering site review requirements for pre-established uses and ensure mutual understanding and collaboration between municipalities and applicants. The City of San Clemente's utility annual encroachment is an example of an annual encroachment agreement that covers routine utility work in the public right-of-way that could be extended to broadband infrastructure. For microtrenching, creating a regionally consistent microtrenching policy would be beneficial to facilitate faster and less expensive broadband infrastructure development. It's a relatively new technology that can drastically reduce cost and construction time, but some municipalities express concern or uncertainty regarding quality and visual standards. The City of Los Angeles has created a microtrenching policy which could be adapted for our purposes, and their policy addresses some of those concerns with unregulated microtrenching, such as depth, quality, and visual standards. Next slide, please. Finally, we identified a few best practices for implementation. Municipalities are finding creative ways to utilize existing assets, build out infrastructure, and expand services quickly. This starts with inventorying their existing assets and creating policies to lease and share those assets. Fiber leasing provides cities with the opportunity to generate revenue while expanding broadband service. It can also reduce the cost barrier for smaller internet service providers to enter the market, creating more competition. In a moment, we'll hear from the City of Riverside about their dark fiber leasing program, which leases fiber capacity to companies. And we'll also hear from South Bay City, the South Bay City Council of Governments on how they use their fiber ring to provide affordable, high-speed broadband service to all 16 South Bay cities. Another city creating expansive partnership opportunities is New York City, which recently released a universal solicitation for broadband, inviting the telecommunications industry to partner with the city. The city is giving providers access to over 100,000 city assets that can be used to deploy broadband infrastructure on everything from rooftops to bus shelters. Finally, although this survey focused primarily on programming addressing access concerns, we did identify the City of San Diego's Access for All plan as a best practice for programming addressing adoption by making more public Wi-Fi service available. You'll hear more about this program during the panel presentations next. But before we start the panel though, we'd like to take a moment now to address any questions about what I just presented or what Antoinette presented earlier. So if you'd like to ask a question, please do so now.
I see a hand up from Diana. Diana Rojas. You're muted if you're trying to ask your question. Oh, okay, we lost Diana. Any other questions about the information that was presented by Amy or by me? Okay, I don't see any. So let's go ahead and move into the panel. I just want to thank you, Amy. I know it was a lot of work to conduct all of those interviews and summarize the findings. And I want to let everyone know, we did a high-level summary today, but we'll be sending out the more detailed information on the interviews to everyone who attended this workshop after the meeting today, and both the broadband provider interviews, the summary of those, as well as the jurisdiction interviews, and a copy of the PowerPoint presentation so that you have all of the data that was presented today. So our panel today is going to be moderated by our very own entrepreneur in residence, Sanjeev Nanda. Sanjeev joined us back in 2019 to serve as a strategic advisor on technology and data. He has over 200 granted patents and more than 25 years of research and development leadership management experience at Qualcomm in telecommunications and semiconductor industry. So we are really fortunate to have him on the team supporting this project. And it is my pleasure to turn it over to Sanjeev to lead our esteemed panel and a discussion with all of you. Sanjeev, you are up.
And I am unmuted. Thank you, Antoinette. Thanks for that nice introduction. In this next segment, we have this opportunity to learn from our expert panelists that we've gathered today about three very new and successful programs. Amy highlighted them in her last slide. And so let me introduce our experts. Jackie Bacharach, Executive Director of the South Bay Cities Council of Governments, will discuss the South Bay Fiber Network, a newly deployed municipal fiber ring. Jonathan Benke, the Chief Information Officer of the City of San Diego, will discuss San Diego's Access for All program, a pilot program to deliver internet access to low-income communities. And then finally, Todd Corbin, General Manager, City of Riverside, will present Riverside's one-stop shop and the dark fiber leasing programs. We're asking our panelists to speak for 10 minutes each, and then we will follow up with a discussion about all three programs, what lessons we can draw, what resources we can reuse or adopt as we develop our regional digital equity strategy and action plan. So I'll go to Jackie Bacharach first. Jackie.
Hello. Oh, okay, there you are. Thank you so much for inviting me. Can you all hear me? Yes? Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I realize that Sunny and I are the two foreigners that you've invited, and I appreciate that. If we can go to the next slide. I wanted to say who we are. South Bay City's Council of Governments is in Los Angeles County. And you can see at the top of the screen, Los Angeles Airport is at the top and the Port of Los Angeles is at the bottom. We are what we call a suburban laboratory because we really include all of California's diversity: beaches, hills, valleys, affluent communities, disadvantaged communities, and many, many languages. We're 15 cities that go from 2,000 to 150,000 people, and we're about 1 million people altogether. Can I go to the next slide, please? We started on this in 2016. And what happened was we were thinking that if you think about where we're located, Silicon Beach, which is Santa Monica, Playa Vista area in LA County, was moving south. And we were worried that our businesses didn't actually have enough broadband capacity for the high-tech firms that would come into the South Bay. So we were having discussions with our Workforce Investment Board, and it turns out right then a business left the city of Torrance. And one of the reasons they used was that they had bad network services. So that got us into high gear, and we started working with the Workforce Investment Board as a job retention and attraction issue. Can we go to the next slide, please? We hired Magellan Advisors, and they did a great job of telling us what was there in the South Bay. We looked at what the current conditions were in our municipalities, and they did a study of that. They found out, and the next slide will explain that, they found out that the applications, next slide please, that the applications were varied in every city. Some had a lot of, relatively a lot of service, and others didn't. Many cities were purchasing much less bandwidth than they needed. They hadn't really been paying a lot of attention to what they would need in the future. Cities were paying a lot of money. They were paying one of our cities was paying $6,000 a month for less than a gigabit of service. And we felt, and one of the things I think a Council of Governments is important for, is to look into the future and help cities prepare for the future. And we felt that our cities were not prepared for that increasing demand that they would need. Next slide. What Magellan Advisors found out was that the first thing they were going to check for us was, had our cities been forward-thinking enough to lay enough public fiber so that we could put together a network? And it turns out we did not have enough fiber to put together a public network. So instead of stopping there, Magellan suggested that we go and put out an RFP, see what the private sector could do for us. So together, and we got a contribution from one of our supervisors and the Workforce Investment Board, we put out an RFP. We got 4 responses, and one of them was exactly the kind of thing we were looking for, which was a service that would link our cities together. And if you can go to the next slide, we had to, the next nut to crack was that it cost money, obviously. And but if you'll go to the second star over there, you could see that I told you that our cities were spending $4,000 to $6,000 a month for less than a gigabit of service. And this provider, American Dark Fiber, who we let the contract to, was going to charge our cities $1,000 a month for 1 gigabit of service, scaling up to 10 gigabits for $2,750. This was amazing. It was saving every single city money, except for the very small cities who were paying like $900 a month for practically no service. The nut we had to crack was how we were going to pay for the capital cost, which was the first star. It was about $6 million, $6.9 million to actually construct the system. And what the system is it's a ring architecture, and I'll show you a picture in a minute, with laterals off to each city hall. And we didn't know how we were going to, we knew the cities were not going to have $6 million to devote to this, but in Los Angeles County, we have a sales tax that comes from our transportation agency. And I have to tell you, it was music to my ears when Sonny McPeak said that Caltrans is a mobility agency, transportation is that trip not taken. That's the kind of thing we've been saying. So we went to Metro, our transportation agency, and we I should back up and say that every subregion in Los Angeles County gets dedicated money for transportation through Measure M. And we get about $250 million over a course of 5 years in the South Bay. So we decided to use our transportation construction funds, and we went to Metro and asked them, can we have $6 million, $6.9 million out of the 250 for our construction? And that would have made it free for every single city, essentially free, because the South Bay COG would be paying with regional funds. Metro's response was no, that this was not a transportation expense, that we could not use our money for this purpose. South Bay Cities is not very good with no. And we came back, and the next 3 slides will tell you what we sent to Metro. You can go to the next slide. We sent them all of the reasons why transportation uses a fiber network and why it was so important. And you can see here next bus signs, changeable message signs, smart streets, signal synchronization, autonomous vehicles. Next slide. This is remote signals, electronic pedestrian safety, managing traffic detours. You can go on, advanced parking. Next slide. Is this the 3rd slide? Yes, okay, I'm getting myself confused. Okay, dynamic parking pricing, car sharing, all these things were necessary. The next, so what happened was our board of directors was very supportive of what we were looking at, and we ended up getting the money. Next slide. What we said was, just as Sunny said, that the trip not taken is a transportation trip that we should all be looking for, that it facilitates a virtual presence without congestion and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This slide looks old when you think about COVID, because now we know about telecommuting, we know about distance education and e-government and digital medicine. But back when we were doing this, it was 2019, and we had to explain that these were very important in our transportation system. So having the money, armed with the money, we were able to start our network. And so if you can go to the next slide, I just want to go through briefly the highlights. We had a kickoff meeting with our cities. They helped us with the RFP. They also helped us with the interviews. And by 2019, we had the funding taken care of, we had the sites finalized, and we started our first work order. Next slide. We managed to build this entire network during COVID. Next slide. And this is the network. And as came up earlier, I think it was Janara said about redundancy, the ring that you see here, what we call this affectionately a ring, is redundant. So if it breaks in one place, it goes in the other direction, and the cities stay connected. The long lines you see are the laterals that go off to City Hall. We also have some other agencies. The Workforce Investment Board has 7 sites connected, West Basin Municipal Water District, Metro, because they gave us money, they wanted to be connected. So we're going to have transportation applications with Metro. And we also have the Beach Cities Health District and the Lundquist Biomedical Institute. So we have opportunities for telemedicine, workforce training, and city municipal services. And we're looking to build all those out. Next slide. We had a connection ceremony. We waited to do it in person, which became impossible. So in November, we turned on we celebrated virtually. And by August, we actually had it all up and running. 27 sites are now connected. And you can see that the core ring is 98 miles, 65% is aerial, and 35% is underground. And what I neglected to say was that the way this is working is American Dark Fiber is putting together existing private fiber that exists in the region. So Crown Castle, Edison, other agencies that have fiber, they're leasing that to create the network, and then they're filling in the gaps. So the construction fills in the gaps and builds the laterals and connects all of our agencies. Next slide. Our next steps is probably what's most important for this discussion. We're looking to find applications for cities so that they can make joint purchases of software. We can put things on our ring and cities can share them, and we can find ways to address the digital divide for our cities.
Collaborating, we're working with the agencies that are already on the network, looking at trying to put those workforce investment board sites into maybe city halls to provide trainings at those locations. We're all now part of the same network. We're looking at working in our community and trying to take the middle mile closer to the people. And one of the things I wanted to mention is we've applied for a Caltrans planning grant and some other grants to take our fiber network into neighborhoods. We strongly applaud and recognize and support the state's desire to have everyone in everybody's household have broadband. That's a very, very heavy lift. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how to get some of these resources to the neighborhood where we can start not only providing our network into a neighborhood center, but we can have digital literacy training, we can have workforce training, health, telehealth, tele-education, and it would be right in people's neighborhoods. And so we're looking for sites. We have several cities and disadvantaged communities that will work on this with us. We also are going to use those sites as micro mobility hubs. So they will be close enough to the community so that we will have charging stations there. We can get funded for this, and people will be able to come to these sites in scooters and segways and neighborhood electric vehicles. So we're trying to promote bringing high tech to the neighborhood, even including 3D printing, where people can start manufacturing their own micro businesses in their neighborhood community. We think that's probably a good first step as we try to get to everybody's home. Next slide. I'm very excited and proud to say that we won an award, American City and County, and they gave us the award judged on our uniqueness, our short and long-term value to the community, and effective and innovative financing. And I just love the crown, so I have to put it in every one of the presentations. Next slide. This is my contact information. You'll get that. I think you'll get the slide, so you'll have that later. And we're very excited about where we can now take this, how we can work in our communities to raise the awareness of how important this is, address the digital divide, and I look forward to your questions and talking about this further. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jackie. Really insightful presentation, and congratulations on that award. And I know that it's being recognized around, your work is being recognized around the state. The next speaker we have is Jonathan Benke, from Chief Information Officer, the City of San Diego, and he'll speak to us about San Diego Access for All. So Jonathan, over to you.
All right, thanks, Sanjiv, and thanks for having me. Great to see all of the innovation going on in the region here. Great presentations today. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the details in the city's digital equity program called SD Access for All. Next slide, please. And really framing the problem we're trying to solve. 2018 data shows that 53,000 San Diego households lack broadband internet service. And it's not just about the broadband internet service. The 4 pillars of digital equity, when we look at them, include access to computers, digital literacy, how to use those devices, broadband access, of course, and then an environment conducive to learning and work. And you can think about a student standing outside a coffee shop on their cell phone trying to do homework, right? So it's really all of those things that we took a look at when we went down this road on the project. Next slide, please. And then why is digital equity so important? We've seen with the pandemic how that's even become more critical. Searching and applying for work and the telecommuting that's taken place during the pandemic. Most government services became e-services, right? Government buildings were closed in many cases. Online school took place, so important for students to have that access. Civic engagement at public meetings. Many public meetings were exclusively virtual. and financial services, health and safety information, engaging with friends and families, all of those things even more critical now during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So back about this time last year, the city council offices, as they were forming the budget for fiscal 21, dedicated $500,000 of one-time funding for internet access for low-income communities. And this was a pilot program. And the independent budget analyst put some recommendations into our budget as we got into this fiscal year, really focusing on developing free public Wi-Fi hotspots at city facilities in low-income communities, and then exploring and developing partnerships with internet service providers and nonprofit partners for those same services, and creating an internal team from the city departments to really tie all that together and bring some services together. Next slide, please. So the Digital Equity Working Group was created across the city, and it's represented by the mayor's office, the city council offices, the independent budget analyst, the economic development department, their work with the Promise Zone partners, the ability to write grant proposals. Our public library has been a front runner in digital equity. Our Parks and Recreation Department, they had e-services programs, Department of IT trying to tie all that together. Our Performance and Analytics departments helping out with surveys as we're trying to get feedback from the community on these initiatives, and our Communications department. And that logo you see on the screen there is how the program was branded, SD Access for All. Next slide, please. So, looking again at those 4 pillars of digital equity, we started out in July of last year with a partnership with the San Diego Futures Foundation, and they're a nonprofit really focused on digital equity, started back in 1999. And the city donated over 2,200 end-of-life computers for refurbishment, and the San Diego Futures Foundation takes those computers. They've got an agreement with Microsoft, so they apply full Microsoft licensing, really add new value to those computers and get them out to the community. But the Futures Foundation is also working on digital literacy and training, and they support the computers that they push out there as well. And then they're also providing internet access resources. So depending on where the person is, Futures Foundation provides resources to try to get the most affordable and fast internet that's available. Next slide, please. And so the first initiative we started, and remember, we're in the pandemic, so when we looked at what can we do with this funding, we were really, really having to focus on outdoors, right? We were not going to provide much in the way of indoor that can be consumed during the pandemic. So we started out with library community computer labs. You can see in the picture there. These are computer labs outdoors, and they've got tables, chairs, shade canopies, everything but coffee. And they've been opened up. People can check out laptops, bring their own device. The Public Library Foundation assisted with laptops. And we've also expanded access for outdoor Wi-Fi at a total of 30 library locations. So again, trying to spread that out across the community. And next slide, please. And you can see them on the map on the right. It's probably hard to see, but those green areas represent the low to moderate income communities, and the purple area represents the San Diego Promise Zone. So we had our GIS team really put together a map of these target areas that we wanted to expand access, and look for gaps. So how can we cover this better? So we also looked at park and rec centers, park locations, trying to provide Wi-Fi coverage across the park. The San Diego Parks Foundation had been well underway even before the pandemic in connecting 24 park locations. So they got that off to a quick start. We found an additional, I think, 6 locations that didn't require trenching. Again, these are one-time funds, so we wanted to make them shovel ready and get the access out there as quickly as possible with the pandemic. So that gives us a total of 30 park and rec locations that have outdoor Wi-Fi coverage as well. And next slide, please. And once we got the library and park locations mapped out, we had the GIS team. You can see the green blobs around some of the city facility locations. That's a 5-minute walk. So we started looking at where are the gaps here with a 5-minute walk. Again, how can we expand that coverage? Plenty of work to do. So we worked with the libraries, and we got a deal together with AT&T to provide 900 cellular hotspots that can be checked out by library patrons. And those are available now at about a dozen libraries, and library patrons can check those out, take those home. Those are similar to broadband speeds. They can connect their household and use those for a month, and another way to get connected. And then another thing we're working on is partnerships with school districts. So we've been working with San Diego Unified, and meeting with San Diego Unified, we wanted to make sure we weren't doing anything redundant. They've got great programs. They're doing the similar thing with the cellular hotspots. They partnered with Cox in the Connect to Compete program, which provides home internet access for students. The school district sponsored that. But we also found on the map there, those orange icons are school locations, and they've got additional abilities to provide Wi-Fi. So we're trying to provide Wi-Fi from 10 school district locations, working on finalizing that agreement pretty close. And then you can see the purple dots on the map. We worked with Cox and found an additional 255 street level Cox hotspots across the city in the low to moderate income communities. And those are also expanding our access. So in all, we've got about 300 locations stood up with public Wi-Fi, and continuing to work on expanding that. In the San Diego Promise Zone, we worked, our economic development has a department has a Promise Zone working group. And so those Promise Zone partners provided some priority locations in the Promise Zone. And you think about the Euclid Corridor, Chicano Park. And so we are working on expanding that access further in the San Diego Promise Zone. Next slide, please. And also focusing on digital literacy. So the department's working with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We'll be doing asset mapping of all digital inclusion resources in the region, and then bringing a group comprised of libraries and community-based organizations together to be trained by NDIA in a customized approach to digital navigation. And these organizations will be able to offer these services this summer to the community, and NDIA will also be offering ongoing support throughout the year to assist in helping us measure our outcomes. And as we work with the Economic Development Department and Promise Zone, we're working to contract with Pillars of the Community, and they're a trusted community messenger located in southeastern San Diego. And we're planning on having Pillars of the Community engage the community for about 2 months with boots on the ground, neighborhood outreach in our most under-resourced communities. And we want them to really get the word out there on the federal emergency broadband benefit program. And the plan is to have them really get out there into the community, go to food banks and other community events, and be out there with tablets, assisting in enrollment in the federal emergency broadband benefit program. And we're also partnering with the ISPs out there to maximize the efforts. And I think we'll be seeing in the next couple of weeks more information on the emergency broadband benefit. But if you're not familiar, the federal government is subsidizing up to $50 a month for broadband service for homes, or $75 a month, I think, in tribal areas. So as we talk with the ISPs, that will fully cover internet service for the community. And I think the only concern with that program is that it could funding could run out. So we don't know how long that funding will last, and we're taking a close look at that. And then Chromebooks for our libraries. We wanted to expand again, get the devices out there. Next slide, please. And so we have a communications campaign. Mayor Gloria made an announcement at City Heights Library on Tuesday morning about this. We've got postcards, posters. The city will be pushing out more information in social media. We've got a QR code that links to our website that we stood up for this, providing information about all these resources and interactive maps. So if you're a San Diego resident and you want to find out the closest public Wi-Fi available, that link at the bottom of the slide there will provide an interactive map and hopefully get them something close by. Next slide, please. And just an overview of how residents can get connected. We will continue updating that website. We're continuing to work at expanding the program, make it sustainable. We've got an additional, I think, $450,000 in one-time funds in the next fiscal year to continue this program and hopefully build upon what we've put together. And next slide, please. Oh, and I guess that's all of them. All right, well, thank you, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks. What a comprehensive program, comprehensive presentation. We'll do Q&As at the end of the panel. So the third panelist we have, we're pleased to have, is Todd Corbin, General Manager, City of Riverside, and he'll present City of Riverside's one-stop shop and the dark fiber leasing program. So over to you, Todd.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to come to San Diego with all of you. Great to be with you. Honored to be here. Next slide, please. First, let's talk a little bit about our one-stop shop. There's much discussion about the permitting process. And this for us is something that we tackled a number of years ago and put together our award-winning one-stop shop process. As you can see here, it's made up of all of the city departments, public works, planning, customer service, public utilities, fire, all in one location within City Hall. Next slide, please. And let's not underestimate some of those small customer service value-added benefits. Here on the left-hand slide, whether it's an express elevator that takes you directly from the ground floor to the one-stop shop without having to go to any other floors, or whether it's seeing our confidence level of the level of service we're providing. We're trying to set a standard of really high quality custom customer service. The value of this also isn't just having it in one place so that a developer or a resident doesn't have to go to different apartments, different buildings across the city, but it's also this group now operates as one team. They may report structurally to different managers and different department heads. However, their function within the one-stop shop is extremely integrated, and they learn from each other as developers bring in plans and have issues, and you're trying to work them out together at the same time. Next slide, please. Here you'll see kind of our new perspective on service. Obviously, it changed during COVID. So what we've been able to do this year is stand up our computer and our online virtual services. which was extremely successful. You can see on the bottom left-hand side, we even started to do some inspections virtually to keep our development process going. The city of Riverside has been enjoying really strong development over the last couple of years. And during this last year of the pandemic, we actually saw an increase in the total market valuation of the development projects coming through the one-stop shop. Next slide, please. Here you'll see a pre-pandemic, traditionally a traditional citywide service provider for permitting, 95% in person, 5% virtual, field inspections done 100% in person, having to pivot, and it certainly was not a smooth pivot, and we're still learning as we go, but now being able to process 100% of our plans and permits through our online service, doing 27% of our inspections virtually. And I think the greatest thing is now that we're starting to open back up, and fortunate to do so, we're getting developers that are continuing to want to continue to do it online and virtually because it streamlines their business. It helps improve their own performance. And in many cases, some of these developments and developers are not local to the city. And so it helps improve their bottom line also. Next slide, please. So we certainly call this our best of class service. We put all of our departments in one place, but I think the core of it is our development review committee. The development review committee is an opportunity for a developer to come in to propose the project, not just to one department, but to all the departments sitting around the same table, and have them give the developer input prior to them submitting their documents. So that process of submitting and doing corrections and resubmitting really takes a lot of time on both ends, and it reduces, I think, the confidence in the process. And so being able to sit around the table, have our team give the input to the developer so that when they ultimately submit their documents, they understand the expectations and the standards and improve and reduce that back and forth from that point forward. So that is one of our biggest improvements in this one-stop shop process. Next slide, please. So moving over to our dark fiber leasing program. This was established in 2017 by our prior general manager of Riverside Public Utilities. And what we had is the council approved our dark fiber program. We serve Riverside Public Utilities, an electric water utility. And in the electric utility, we have 14 substations. Those substations are connected through a fiber ring. And in that fiber ring, we aren't using all the capacity of those lines. And so the general manager at the time tried to maximize the value of that idle capacity and then put together this dark fiber program. We don't light up the service. We don't provide the service. We just basically provide that conduit to allow them to do that. But in doing so, in developing the program, establishing universal pricing, a master lease agreement, the cost center within the electric utility, and then also because it's a municipal electric utility and all of the safety requirements we need for our own data and cybersecurity protection, putting together that physical security program is also very, very critically important. Next slide, please. So give you a sense of the city of Riverside, just north of San Diego County. We're 82 square miles, population of about 325,000. And we have 122 miles of fiber currently installed. And that's the network we're trying to leverage. And within those substations, we use it for our own SCADA purposes, for our own video capturing purposes, but there was a lot of capacity that was still available that we're trying to maximize. The next slide, please. Give you a sense, this is a small program in comparison to what we heard prior, but we have 9 city departments. So we serve basically the city of Riverside, our own internal departments as customers and for external customers. I think from the digital divide standpoint, the internal city departments are extremely important because as you can see here, you have not just police and fire, but public works, parks, libraries, museums, and airport, all facilities of which our population visits on a daily basis. And then our external customers are really those larger institutional customers. We're blessed to have the University of California, Riverside and Cal Baptist University, and also the County of Riverside using the system, as well as Charter Communications. Next slide, please. So to give you a sense of these our internal departments, parks, libraries, our community centers, our open sports fields, and our museum are all digital access points. And during the pandemic, our parks department worked with the Riverside Unified School District while the schools were closed to establish learning centers and multiple community centers. So we would provide that digital access to those students who most needed it, who came for either help or support or that one-on-one connectivity needs. And so certainly, as mentioned, school districts were really out in front trying to get connectivity to their students. But what we were trying to do is just provide the locations and the place, if needed, for those students to go especially during the pandemic. Next slide, please. The challenges and opportunities. I mentioned the uniform pricing policy. That seems like something that is extremely valuable, so that the pricing is something that is established and it can be marketed. The challenge with that is 2017, as we went through our own studies, developed the pricing policy, the marketplace continues to change. And our pricing policy is being revisited because it's not being priced in the market where we're actually providing incentives for new customers to come on board. And so we recognize that we have to change, we have to update with the marketplace. In fact, I think the city of Riverside actually solved the digital divide 15 years ago. Riverside's blessed to be, I think, large enough to have some economies of scale and small enough to be able to do some of these types of projects, but we had citywide Wi-Fi 15 years ago across the entire city. The challenge with that is receive some money through a grant and put some funding towards it. Whole city is connected. It seems like something, if you think back 15 years ago, is a great thing. Challenge is technology starts to change so quickly and the marketplace evolves so quickly that the technology that our residents had in their hand was faster, more reliable than the equipment that was on the citywide Wi-Fi system. The funding to keep it up to date, the maintenance that was required on it, and just the funding to keep it as an ongoing program is one of those challenges. So I think for us, the dark fiber leasing program works really well because we're trying to maximize the value of that idle capacity, not necessarily trying to keep up just with the marketplace. And certainly the cost of connection to new customers, that last mile, is something that for some customers is cost prohibitive. We are trying to, in fact, the city has established what we call our innovation district, more than a 3 square mile area, trying to attract new clean tech businesses, leveraging the new California Air Resources Board testing facility on the campus of UC Riverside, and trying to bring some of those companies to Riverside County and to the city of Riverside. And broadband is a key component of that, and just providing that data access that they need. So getting connectivity there, this next year, finishing our LED streetlight retrofit project is another one of those milestones that will help us expand and improve our ability to serve that digital divide that does exist throughout our community. I talked about changes in the marketplace. And also, I think from some of the other comments of our panelists, establishing the local need is absolutely important. We talked about the permitting process. Access is a local issue, and whether it's permitting, having even some of the companies that are putting in these small cell sites, first of all, having cell phone or the general manager of public utilities or the city manager or the mayor certainly helps get some attention and get service. But having a plan to understand where in the community the need is, and then looking at the assets that you have in place. The electric utility is a great opportunity to do that. And we're looking to try to expand, trying to connect the dots between where the need is in the community, where the need is from other departments, and what we can do to help support that. And then finally, we believe all of this is mentioned here. We're speaking to the fire as a tool for economic development. We recognize it is becoming the standard. It's one of those absolute requirements of especially some of the higher level clean tech type businesses that need access for type of work that they do. And whether it's City of Riverside or cities across the South Bay or in San Diego, that's our challenge. And so I think working together, we certainly have, and sharing some of these success stories, we can build on those and put them in play within our own service territories. And I believe that might be it. Next slide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. I'm going to ask the other panelists to turn on their cameras as well. I know we ran a little over, but I'm glad that we could offer all our panelists some time to present at length. These kind of thoughtful presentations are very useful. These days sometimes we're rushing through webinars and not getting chance to absorb. So thanks to all the panelists. We'll open. We're obviously running a little bit over, so we'll open up to Q&A. I'd like to make a quick comment of what I took away from all the panelists. Firstly, there's just lots of lessons learned. I was absorbing all through. The question uppermost in my mind is always, how do we kind of set up a mutual assistance network? So everything that you've learned and executed, how you're going to help all our other cities and communities achieve those. The other thing that always comes to mind is, how are we measuring whether we're actually succeeding in what we've done? And I liked that smiley thing at the elevator and Todd's presentation. So you're measuring real time as to what satisfaction you're doing for your customers, and then the lessons from you, all of you, about how you succeeded in working across agencies and across different jurisdictions and responsibilities. So anyway, those are uppermost on my mind, and it's open to Q&A from the participants, and you can address my questions during the Q&A as well. Crystal or Antoinette, are you monitoring the raise hands?
Yeah, go ahead and raise a hand. Use the raise hand feature for questions of the panel or any of the staff.
I do see a question or a hand raised by Chip Finch. Chip, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, good morning. I actually have two. I got one for Jackie and I got one for Todd. Jackie, how did you guys go about determining what city facilities to connect? Or was the goal to try to connect everything that the various cities and various jurisdictions needed to connect?
We actually started off with asking cities what facilities they would want to connect. We wanted to feature all of the city halls. We ended up getting 54 possible sites, parks, libraries, all kinds of different things that the cities wanted to connect, their transit agencies, those that had transit services. And when it came down to actually getting the money and then starting, it became a question of how many cities wanted to pay $1,000 a month for those sites. And so the number dropped off. But we started, the answer to your question is we started with asking the cities where they would find this most valuable. And so we still have a list of places that once they can find the monthly costs, we can work with them to find more places.
Excellent. And how'd you go about the fee structure for connection?
This came from American Dark Fiber. They, the connection, oh, well, the monthly service came from American Dark Fiber. The connection cost was different for everybody, every location, because it depended on how long the lateral was, how much if fiber existed, and how much needed to be built. And we worked with American Dark Fiber on what they were going to charge us for what that was going to cost for each location. And then we used our Measure M money to pay for that capital cost. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Todd, how did the broadband providers identify locations where there's dark fiber available that they might be able to use or lease? And also, what is the lease term that you guys typically lease the fiber out for?
Our electric, in the one-stop shop, we have access to our map. And so they can come in and either look at, or we can provide that information to them. I believe that the term itself is based on, I don't know if there's a standard term. I'll check on that and I'll provide the information back to the group. In fact, we'll pull the agreement also and provide that to you. I don't know the answer to that question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Todd, for your answers. Those are good information. Thank you.
I just make a quick comment, Todd. I actually, when we were searching through, we found that there were actually terms were listed
on the website.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Next question is from Shada of MTS. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Shada, to ask your question. Okay, well, Shada's figuring out how to ask her question. We'll go to Elaine.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. Jonathan, from the city of San Diego, I was interested in the emergency broadband enrollment. Is this something that can work out in the backcountry? I represent out in Borrego Springs specifically.
Yes, it is. It is a nationwide initiative, and the the way it was structured is the federal government will provide this subsidy to the internet service providers. And so internet service providers would have, signed up to participate in the program, receive the subsidy, and it's all in their best interest, right? It really will help the community, help their sales. So we're seeing, here in San Diego, I think we've talked with Cox and a company called Lockett, who's been working with the Parks Foundation, and we're seeing the ISPs sign up for this. So I would anticipate that those ISPs that serve the backcountry would be participating in the program as well. They're eligible, and I think the FCC site is providing updates of the participating ISPs out there. So you may be able to check that out if you're familiar with the ones serving some of those areas.
Okay. And I also want to thank everybody, the panelists who provided their great knowledge and how they navigated getting everything together for their communities. And I just hope that it can also work out in the back county areas for San Diego. So that's my only input. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Elaine.
Okay, Shada, we've been unmuted you. Do you have a question? Your hand is up. Okay, maybe it was an accident. Do we have other questions for the panel? I guess not.
So Antoinette, maybe we can ask the panelists to sort of talk to each other and to the participants and the panelists, and try to understand where we should be going. So my question in that context is, what resources should Sandike be developing based on what we learned today that can help our local jurisdictions, local cities and county and tribal lands and so on, and what resources that you have developed in your own city can you offer to help other jurisdictions so that we can all move along further. So that's sort of my thought about how best to utilize the remaining time we have.
I guess I can start. One of the things we're looking at, which I didn't have time to talk about, is how to bring destinations into the community. And for example, we're working, we have 4 cities on the Palos Verdes Peninsula that have 4 different city halls, and they're not necessarily close to one section of the peninsula, the eastern end. And so we're working with one of the cities on providing a satellite government center that would be using our technology, would allow people to access their government by going to the satellite center and doing things online there and accessing other services. We're looking at that. We're looking at, we just had a meeting with the Workforce Investment Board and how we can make and I sort of mentioned this, each one of our city halls and everybody that's on that ring can be doing workforce investment training, can be doing, we have health agencies, telemedicine. So what we're trying to do is bring services a lot closer to people. And then working with, we're also, I forgot to mention, working with LA County on their, they have something called Deleting the Digital Divide. And we're working with them on possibly pilot projects that we can be doing in the South Bay to bring these services closer to people, addressing the digital literacy and the digital equipment and the digital infrastructure. So those are some of the things that I wanted to mention.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's a little bit of a interesting conundrum there, right, Jackie, that basically we're using digital literacy to, we may require digital literacy before people can exploit those services, but maybe not. Maybe there are actually physical front ends that you're describing in remote communities.
Well, I do think it is important that we not just think that if we can get everybody hooked up, that we've solved the problem, because that's just not going to be the case. So we have to do these things hand in hand.
Great point. Any other comments from participants?
We did have a question in the chat from City of Escondido, Craig Williams, asking about funding programs to assist cities, either federal or regional programs.
Anybody, any panelist want to comment?
We can speak about anticipated funding programs, and I know Sunny's been tracking this closely and probably has some thoughts there, but definitely through federal stimulus, funding is expected, and also money through the state. And one of the main reasons that we are really fast tracking this regional digital equity strategy is to position ourselves to be able to compete for the funding to implement the strategy and action plan.
And if I could, I would add, Antoinette, that there is pending legislation in California to authorize additional collections into the California Advanced Services Fund. Going back to 2010, it was the California Emerging Technology Fund who worked with Senator Alex Padilla, then State Senator Alex Padilla, now our US Senator, who introduced the concept of regional consortia to be a way to bring together leadership in voluntarily defined regions that could capitalize on existing leadership. And so that is one mechanism. However, we need to get additional funds, and the expansion authority and resources to flow through regional consortia actually needs to be increased. And so that's part of what we're trying to advocate for in AB 14 SB 4 on that side of the equation to increase dollars into the California Advanced Services Fund. We CETF are supporting at least 1.5 billion that through revenue bonds could net $1 billion in infrastructure dollars and then capitalize other accounts within CASF, including regional consortia. As you know, it is the Southern Border Broadband Consortium that represents San Diego County along with Imperial County, and it is Imperial Economic Development Corporation that's the fiscal agent. The first round, it was San Diego Economic Development Corporation who then decided not to apply again. So the first thing I want to say is that I really want to encourage SANDAG and the MPOs to support adequate funding into the regional consortia account, because that could then be tapped by other organizations such as SANDAG to work with cities and counties. Secondly, the bond measure that Assemblymember Mertsucci, Assembly members Garcia, Santiago have joined him in actually does target $10 billion that would flow through public agencies. We're encouraging technical assistance, grants, planning that could come to cities. Lastly, as I think you have referenced or alluded to, all of Southern California, so SANDAG and SCAG are joining forces to ask for an earmark of the federal dollars for broadband for at least $4 billion from federal funds into Southern California to be matched by at least another $4 billion by the state. In that funding, there has to be the ability to support, if you will, the community up efforts to get to scale for broadband planning that then aligns with a lot of other interests. So that's what we're working on. Short of that, there is not actually yet identified in the federal pots of money direct funding. But if we work with SANDAG and SCAG as the two very, very largest MPOs in the country, among the largest, I think we can be that leading edge for the U.S. Department of Transportation and the funding for broadband that could get the technical assistance dollars that Craig is asking about, and others I'm sure are wondering about.
So that's why it's important that we develop the strategy and that we hear from all of you cities about the resources that you need, so that when we complete the strategy, we have a good sense for where the need is and where the resources should go. So we'll send out a little survey after the panel, so after you've had some time to kind of absorb what you've heard today, and try to get some more input from cities on your thoughts related to that. We did have one last question for Jonathan, and maybe Jonathan, you can quickly address it. It is striking the balance between allocating resources to programs that give people, access to those external resources like the library versus resources to allow affordable internet for residents in their home. So a more permanent solution versus a temporary solution. Wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yes, before the emergency broadband benefit came out in information in January, February, we actually had been developing a program for city-sponsored home internet services, and so it pretty much mirrored what the emergency broadband benefit program did. So that is another area we've explored. We actually just tabled that. We don't know how long the emergency broadband benefit will continue, down in the coming months. So we've left that on the shelf to potentially backfill some of the connectivity. We had focused on, I think, around 1,000 homes as a target to get connected, similar to the emergency broadband benefit. So waiting to see how that, how that program, how long that runs. But we are looking at other opportunities. Again, those 255 street hotspots across the city. Anybody living in the proximity of those can get connected in their home as well. So continuing to look at how we can expand that home access.
Thank you. Okay, we're at time, so just quickly want to touch on next steps. If you can move to the next slide, James. Thank you, first of all, to the panel. We're extremely fortunate to learn from your experience. But I want to just share some of the next steps for the major milestones with developing the strategy and the action plan. So we're going to complete that gap analysis, continue to collect and analyze data over the next couple of months, and wrap that up this summer. And then, of course, the findings of that research will inform our strategy, which we will produce in the fall. And then shortly thereafter, we'll turn that strategy into an action plan by the end of the calendar year. So a really fast pace for this project. I also wanted to let you know that we're working on launching soon a digital equity web presence that will be available as soon as we launch our new SANDAG website very soon. It will include all the data and a variety of resources that you can access and use, everything from outreach materials like a broadband and digital equity 101 to detailed maps that can help you with your own planning and outreach. So we'll send an announcement as soon as those pages are live, and we'll continue to keep it updated. So thank you all for joining today, and we'll send out that little survey to collect information from folks. And just as always, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Excellent, folks.